Claire worked at a fancy restaurant in the middle of the city. She was a quiet woman who never talked much and always kept to herself. Every day, she wore a plain black uniform, tied her hair back, and smiled politely at every customer. People saw her only as a waitress. They didn't know her name. They didn't ask where she came from. She was just there, invisible, like the soft music playing in the background that no one really listened to. Customers gave her orders without looking up from their phones. Some snapped their fingers. Some made her clean up messes that weren't even hers. She never argued. She never rolled her eyes. She just nodded, cleaned, and walked away quietly. She had been working at that restaurant for almost 2 years, but nobody really knew her, not even the other staff. They all talked and joked with each other during breaks, but Claire usually sat alone. She would sometimes stare at the grand piano in the corner of the lounge area. It was big, shiny, and always spotless, but no one ever played it. It was more of a decoration, just something rich people liked to have around. Occasionally someone would walk past it and press a few random keys, but no one could actually play. Most nights the piano just sat there in silence. Claire never touched it. Not once. But sometimes, while wiping tables or collecting empty glasses, she would glance at the keys. Her eyes would rest on them a little too long, like she was remembering something. But then she'd look away quickly and go back to work. No one noticed. No one cared. One evening, the restaurant was unusually full. A famous local businessman was having a dinner party with his friends. They laughed loudly, drank expensive wine, and acted like they owned the place. Claire served their table. One of the men in the group, a guy named Dennis, was clearly drunk and showing off. He had on a shiny watch, a loud voice, and a bad attitude. When he saw the piano sitting untouched in the corner, he chuckled and said, "You know, in all the fancy restaurants I've been to, at least someone plays the piano." Here, dead silence. The others laughed. Dennis looked around the restaurant like he was trying to find someone to mock. His eyes landed on Claire. She was picking up dirty dishes from a nearby table. He smirked and said loudly, "Hey, waitress, can you play?" Claire stopped for just a second. Then she shook her head politely. "No, sir," she said, and walked away. But Dennis wasn't done. "Bet you can't even read music," he called. After her, laughing. Not that I'd expect anyone working here to know art. The people at his table roared with laughter. Claire kept her head down. Her face didn't change. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even seem angry. But deep down, something twisted inside her. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that. People often looked at her and saw nothing special. Just a waitress. Someone whose life didn't matter beyond serving their drinks. After her shift ended that night, Claire walked home like she always did. She didn't take the bus or a taxi. She liked walking. It was quiet and she could think. Her small apartment wasn't far from the restaurant, just 3 streets down. But that night, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she stopped in front of a tiny old music shop. The lights inside were off, but the big front window displayed a grand piano. It was dusty and some keys were chipped, but it still looked beautiful. Claire stared at it for a long time. She lifted her hand and gently touched the glass, as if she could feel the keys through it. Then she sighed, turned around, and walked away into the dark. The next evening, Dennis and his group came back. This time they brought even more people. The restaurant manager was thrilled. Big spenders meant big tips. Claire was assigned to their table again, the moment Dennis saw her. He smirked. "Ah, it's the musical waitress." He laughed. "Come on, show us what you've got tonight." His friends laughed again. Claire didn't respond. She just poured water into their glasses and stood quietly. But then Dennis did something that surprised everyone. He stood up and clapped his hands loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly to the whole restaurant, "tonight we are going to be entertained. Our waitress here is going to play the piano for us. Come on, give her a hand." People turned to look. Some clapped awkwardly. Others looked confused. Claire froze. She hadn't said anything. She hadn't agreed to anything. But the attention was suddenly on her. The restaurant manager looked uncomfortable. He whispered to Claire, "You don't have to do anything. Just ignore him." But Claire looked at the piano, then at Dennis, and then back at the crowd. Then, to everyone's surprise, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. The room went quiet. She walked slowly to the piano. Black work shoes clicked gently on the floor. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. People took out their phones. Some giggled, expecting a disaster. One man whispered, "This is going to be embarrassing." Claire closed her eyes. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a few seconds, and she played the first note. It was soft, just one single note, but it rang through the air like a bell. Then came another and another. Slowly, the music built. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was something deeper, something real. Every note seemed to tell a story of sadness, of love, of something lost and never found again. The restaurant fell into complete silence. No one ate. No one moved. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Claire's hands moved with grace and power, dancing over the keys, like they belonged there. Her eyes were closed, but her soul was wide open. The music wrapped around the room like a soft blanket, pulling everyone into it. Some people gasped, few had tears in their eyes. Even Dennis sat with his mouth slightly open, unable to speak by the time she finished. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. They were stunned, frozen, as if waking up from a dream. Slowly coming back to the real world, Claire stood up, adjusted her uniform, and walked back to the kitchen without saying a word. The moment the door closed behind her, the room exploded into applause. People stood up. Some whistled. Others shouted, "Encore." But Claire was gone. That night, the restaurant was filled with energy. People couldn't stop talking about what they'd just seen. One woman whispered to her friend, "That wasn't just playing. That was feeling. That was magic." Another guest posted a video of the performance online with the caption, "Waitress shocks everyone with haunting piano performance." Who is she? Claire sat alone in the staff room, wiping her hands on a napkin. Her face was calm, but her heart was racing. She didn't want attention. She didn't want questions. But something inside her felt different now, like a piece of her had come back to life. No one in the restaurant saw her the same way again. The woman they had ignored for 2 years had just shown them something unforgettable, and none of them could understand how they hadn't seen it before. She had always been there, just a waitress, just someone in the background, till she touched the piano and shocked them all. The next day, the restaurant was full of whispers. Everyone was talking about what had happened the night before. The piano, which had always been silent, had come alive.
Ow.
And the person who brought it to life was not a hired musician or a famous artist. It was Claire, the quiet waitress. People who had ignored her now looked at her with new eyes. They whispered to each other as she passed their tables, stared at her as if trying to figure her out. Who was she? Where did she learn to play like that? Why had she kept it a secret? Claire felt the change in the air. She noticed the looks, the whispers, the stares. But she didn't say anything. She continued doing her job as usual. She refilled water glasses, took orders, and cleaned up quietly. She didn't smile more than usual, but she didn't seem upset either. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But inside, she felt different. She felt nervous, exposed, like a secret part of her had been revealed to the world. And now there was no going back. In the kitchen, some of her coworkers tried to talk to her. A young waiter named Tom said, "Claire, last night that was. Wow, I had no idea." She just nodded and replied softly, "Thanks." The manager approached her too. He asked gently, "Claire, where did you learn to play like that?" But she gave no answer. She simply said, "A long time ago," and walked away. Meanwhile, at the front of the restaurant, same group of loud rich men returned. Dennis was with them again. His voice filled the space the moment he stepped inside. "So, is the pianist waitress working tonight?" asked, laughing. His friends chuckled, but there was a hint of respect now. They had witnessed something the night before that had shaken them. Dennis waved to the manager, "Put us at the same table, and tell your star waitress to stop by. We will get an encore tonight." Claire saw them. Her stomach twisted. Little she didn't want to play again. Not like that. Not as a joke or for someone's entertainment. But she couldn't hide. The restaurant was full and she had to work. When she came to their table, Dennis smiled at her like an old friend. "There she is," he said. "The mystery musician." Claire said nothing. She took their orders and wrote everything down quickly. But Dennis leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, we've been talking. That performance last night, it wasn't bad. You surprised us." She stayed silent. "So how about this?" he continued. "We're celebrating tonight. My friend here just sold his company. Big money. We want some live music. And since you're the only person in this place who can actually play, we thought you might give us another show." Claire looked up, her eyes calm but serious. "I'm here to work," she said. Dennis smirked. "We'll make it worth your while. $100 for one song. Just one." His friends nodded. One of them pulled out his wallet and placed the cash on the table. "Easy money," he said. The restaurant manager looked nervous. He came over quickly and said, "Mr. Dennis, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Claire isn't part of the entertainment team." Dennis waved him off. "Come on, it's just for fun. Don't be so stiff." Everyone around their table was watching. Other customers had started whispering. Phones were already out, ready to record. The pressure was building. Again, Claire looked at the money. Then she looked at the piano. Something inside her said no. But something else, something deeper, said yes. Not for Dennis, not for the money, but for herself. She nodded. The manager looked surprised, but he didn't stop her this time. Claire walked slowly to the piano again. The room began to quiet down. Phones were raised. People leaned forward. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes. This time, the music was different. It wasn't sad. It wasn't soft. It was strong, full of power and fire. Her fingers moved faster, sharper. The notes rose and fell like a storm. It was a song of defiance, of strength, of someone finding their voice after being silent for too long. The audience didn't move, were frozen, caught in the waves of her music. Even Dennis, who had started the whole thing as a joke, was silent now. His smile was gone. He just stared, completely still. When the song ended, Claire didn't wait for applause. She stood up and walked back to the kitchen. The room exploded in cheers again, louder than the night before. People clapped, shouted, whistled, but Claire didn't return. Inside the staff room, Claire sat alone again. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from something else. Release. It felt like she had unlocked a door she had kept closed for years, and now the light was pouring through. Back in the dining area, Dennis picked up the $100 bill from the table. He held it for a second, then looked toward the kitchen. "She didn't even take the money," he said quietly. His friends said nothing. They were still too surprised. That night, the video of her second performance hit the internet. It spread even faster than the first. People in the comments were trying to figure out who she was. Some said she must be a famous pianist hiding under a fake name. Others guessed she was a former music teacher or a failed star. No one knew for sure. In her apartment, Claire sat on her small couch and watched the video. She saw herself at the piano, eyes closed, hands moving like they had a mind of their own. She barely recognized that version of herself. It felt like watching someone she used to be. Memories came back. The smell of old practice rooms, the sound of applause in concert halls. Her teacher's voice saying, "Music is not something you play. It's something you live." And then, the memory of the accident, the sirens, the hospital, the silence afterward, the pain that had made her walk away from everything. She closed her laptop and sat in the dark. For a long time, she didn't move. Her heart was full of old emotions, sadness, guilt, and something else, hope. The next day at work, the restaurant felt different. The manager pulled her aside and said, "We've had 3 newspapers call. They want to talk to you. And a music school from the city asked if you'd consider giving lessons." Claire looked at him, her eyes wide. She said quickly, "I'm not ready." He nodded. "Okay, but people are going to keep asking." She knew he was right. Later, while she was cleaning tables, a young boy walked up to her with his parents. He couldn't have been older than 10. He held a small music notebook in his hands. "Are you the lady who played the piano?" he asked Claire. Smiled gently and nodded. "I want to play like you," he said. "Can you teach me?" She bent down and looked at him. "Do you love music?" she asked. He nodded quickly. "Yes, more than anything." She smiled a little more. "Then you're already on the right path." The boy's parents thanked her and walked away. Claire stood up and looked toward the piano. It was strange. The thing she had run from so long was now pulling her back. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what she would do next. But something had changed. The music inside her wasn't silent anymore. People still saw her as the waitress. But now they also saw something else. A spark. A mystery. A story waiting to be told. And that story had only just begun. Claire continued to work at the restaurant, but things were no longer the same. Ever since she played the piano for the second time, people looked at her differently. Guests didn't just see a quiet waitress anymore, they saw someone special. Someone who had a deep secret, a hidden talent that had stunned them. Strangers came to the restaurant just to see if she would play again. Some even brought flowers or left notes on the piano with messages like, "Your music touched my heart," or "Please don't stop playing." But Claire didn't return to the piano. Not yet. She stayed quiet, doing her job as she always had, trying to ignore the growing attention. Even her coworkers were curious. Tom, the young waiter who had always been kind to her, tried to talk to her again during a break. "Claire," he said softly, "that music, it felt like magic. You weren't just playing. It was like you were telling a story with every note." Claire smiled faintly, but said nothing. She appreciated the words, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. Not with anyone. But outside the restaurant, something was happening. The videos of her performances were spreading fast. One clip had over 1 million views. People in the comments were begging for more. Some tried to guess who she was. Others said she should be on stage, not serving food. Then one day, a local journalist walked into the restaurant. He was middle-aged, wore glasses, and carried a small notepad. His name was Martin, and he was known for writing stories about hidden talent and forgotten heroes. He sat quietly in a corner, watching Claire work. When she came near his table, he greeted her politely and said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Martin, and I'm writing a piece about your piano performance. Would you be willing to talk?" Claire looked at him for a moment, unsure. "I don't really want attention," she said gently. Martin nodded. "I understand. I think your story could inspire people. Just a small conversation." She thought about it. Then she nodded slowly. "After my shift," she said that evening, they sat together in a quiet corner of the restaurant. Martin asked simple questions, never pushing too hard. "Where did you learn to play?" he asked. Claire took a deep breath. "I studied music. A long time ago," she answered. "In Europe, at a conservatory." Martin blinked. "You went to a conservatory? That explains the skill." "Which one?" "Vienna," she said quietly. His eyes widened. Vienna was one of the most famous cities in the world for classical music. The conservatory there was prestigious, only accepting the best. "And why did you—" "Stop," he asked. Gently, Claire hesitated. She looked down at her hands. "Something happened. I lost someone. Someone I loved very much. After that, I couldn't play anymore." Martin nodded slowly. He didn't ask more. He could see the pain in her eyes. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I need." The next day, his article was published. Title read, "The Waitress Who Played Like a Legend, Hidden Past." In the city's most ordinary place? The article didn't go into deep details, but it mentioned that Claire was once a rising star in music. It told people she had trained in Vienna and had a promising future before tragedy changed her path. The article made Claire even more famous. Music teachers started calling the restaurant. Some of them said they remembered her from her early days. One of them, a woman named Elena, visited in person. She was an older lady with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I taught you when you were just 17, Elena said. "You had hands that could fly across the piano. I'd always wondered." "What happened to you?" Claire was surprised. You remember me? How could I forget, Elena said. You were the best student I ever had. They sat together for a while, talking about old times. Ara! Claire remembered practicing for hours, winning competitions, and dreaming of big stages. But she also remembered the day everything changed, the accident that took her fiancé, Daniel. Daniel had been a cellist. They had met at the conservatory, both full of dreams and music. They played together, laughed together, and planned a future filled with concerts and travels. But one rainy evening, Daniel was driving home from a rehearsal when a drunk driver crashed into his car. He died on the spot. Claire never played again after that. She left everything behind: her school, her friends, her music. She moved across countries, took simple jobs, and tried to disappear. Music became too painful, like a reminder of everything she had lost. I didn't want to feel anymore, Claire told Elena. The piano reminded me of him. Elena held her hand. But you didn't lose music, Claire. It stayed inside you. And now, it's finding its way out again. Claire wiped her eyes. I'm not ready for a stage. You don't need a stage, Elena said. Just keep playing. Let your heart lead. No. Soon, more opportunities started coming in. A producer from a small record label sent a letter offering to record her music. A local music school asked if she would teach children. A nearby concert hall invited her to perform in their yearly benefit event, which supported young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. Claire didn't know what to say. It was all happening so fast. She hadn't asked for fame. She had only played to stop a man from mocking her. But now, the world was asking for more. One evening, while cleaning the restaurant floor after closing, she sat at the piano once again. She didn't play for anyone this time, just herself. Her fingers found a melody, a gentle, soft tune that felt like healing. The room was dark, empty, quiet. But as she played, she felt like someone was sitting next to her. Daniel, not in sadness, but in peace. The music didn't hurt anymore. It felt like coming home. The next morning, she told the restaurant manager, I'd like to accept the invitation. To the benefit concert, he smiled. That's wonderful, Claire. The concert was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Claire began practicing again every evening after work. She borrowed a friend's keyboard to use at home and even visited a music store to refresh her skills. Her hands remembered everything: the notes, the movement, the emotion. It was like they had been sleeping all these years, waiting for her to wake them up. She also began helping one of the dishwashers at the restaurant, a teenager named Miguel. He had once told her he wanted to be a composer. He watched her practice and ask questions. She showed him simple pieces, corrected his hand position, and even gave him old sheet music. You're really good, Miguel said one night. Why were you hiding this? Claire looked at him kindly. Sometimes we bury things we're afraid to face. Miguel nodded slowly. But you're not afraid anymore, right? Claire smiled. I'm trying not to be. The day of the concert arrived. The event was being held at a beautiful old hall with golden lights and red velvet seats. There were music lovers, critics, students, and even a few famous musicians in the audience. Claire stood backstage dressed in a simple black gown. Her heart was beating fast. Her hands were cold. You don't have to prove anything, Elena told her gently, standing beside her. Just play. That's enough. When Claire walked onto the stage, the audience fell silent. People recognized her from the videos, but this time, she wasn't just a waitress surprising a few customers. She was the main performance. The room was full. All eyes were on her. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes floated through the air like soft raindrops. The melody was rich with emotion, gentle and sorrowful, but also hopeful. Every movement of her fingers told a part of her journey, the joy of her youth, the pain of her loss, the silence that followed, and now the courage to return. The audience was completely still. Not a single cough or whisper. Just the sound of Claire's music, pulling them into her world. She played for 15 minutes. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer, like no one wanted the spell to break. Then they stood up. all of them. A standing ovation. The applause echoed through the hall like thunder. Claire looked out at the crowd, tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not just for her pain, but for her strength, her music, her soul. That night, her name spread far beyond the restaurant. People called her the hidden star and the waitress who played the world silent. But to Claire, it wasn't about fame. It was about finding herself again. The part she had buried for so long was finally alive. When she returned to work the next week, her co-workers clapped for her as she walked in. Customers smiled, asked for autographs, and even brought their children to meet her. But Claire didn't let it change her. She still wiped tables. She still worked hard. And every now and then, when the night was quiet and the piano called to her, she answered. And every time she played, the room would go silent again, because once someone hears a soul speak through music, they never forget it. After the concert at the Grand Music Hall, Claire's life began to change more than she had ever expected. The performance had touched hundreds of people in that room, and soon it was touching thousands more online. Videos of her concert began to spread across social media platforms. Blogs, newspapers, and music websites were writing about her. People were calling her the piano angel, the hidden virtuoso, and even the soul of the city. Yet, through all the attention, Claire tried her best to stay grounded. She still showed up at the restaurant every day, wearing her same uniform, doing her job as she always had. She still served tables, smiled kindly, and cleaned up after others. But now guests treated her differently. They greeted her with warm eyes. Some brought flowers, others asked to take pictures. Children came just to meet her, and young musicians begged for advice. Some people even cried when they met her, saying her music had helped them through sadness or gave them courage. Despite all the praise, Claire didn't feel like a star. She felt like someone slowly learning how to live again. The pain of losing Daniel, her fiancé, was still deep inside her. But playing the piano had opened something in her heart. It was painful at times, but it also brought peace. A strange balance of joy and sadness lived in her music now, and people felt that every time she played. One afternoon, the manager of the restaurant came to her during a break. He had a letter in his hand and a soft smile on his face. "This came for you," he said. From the National Music Council. Claire took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation. They were asking her to be a guest performer at a national charity gala. It would take place in just 3 weeks. The gala was not only a big musical event, but also a fundraiser for children who couldn't afford music education. Famous musicians, politicians, and celebrities would be attending. Claire stared at the letter in silence. "You should do it," the manager said gently. "This is a huge honor." Claire didn't answer right away, just held the paper in her hands, unsure of what to feel. That night, Claire went home and sat in her small living room with the lights off. She held the letter on her lap and stared at the piano keyboard she had borrowed from a friend. Her fingers touched the keys, but she didn't play. She just sat there, thinking. The last concert had been magical, but it had also been exhausting. So many memories had returned. She had dreamed of big stages when she was younger, but those dreams had been buried with Daniel. Now, those same dreams were knocking again, louder and louder. But the fear hadn't left her. What if she wasn't ready? What if she made a mistake? What if Daniel was supposed to be on that stage, not her? The next morning, she sat alone in the restaurant before opening hours. That's when Miguel, the dishwasher, came in. He was always early and always curious. Claire had been teaching him a few piano basics when she had time. Walked over and said, "Miss Claire, I saw the news about the gala. Are you going?" Claire looked at him and sighed. "I don't know." "Why not?" he asked. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "It's a big stage, a big crowd. A part of me still feels like I don't belong there." Miguel sat down across from her. "But your music changed people. It changed me." She smiled. "You're kind." "No," he said firmly. "You don't understand. I used to think dreams were only for rich people. But when I heard you play, I thought maybe dreams are for anyone brave enough to try." His words touched her deeply. She looked at him, this young boy with big eyes and big hopes. And something inside her shifted. That night, Claire sat at her piano again. This time she began to play. Not for the restaurant, not for the crowd, just for herself. She played a new melody, one filled with courage, longing, and light. Her fingers moved with certainty, and as she played, she whispered to herself, "I'll do it. For Daniel. For Miguel. For the little girl I used to be." From that moment on, Claire practiced every day. She chose a piece that she had once written herself, a song she had never played in public. It was something personal, something special. A song she had started long ago with Daniel before he died, but she never finished it. Now she would. The closer the gala came, the more nervous she felt. Her hands would sometimes shake, and her sleep was often filled with dreams of her past. But she kept going. The day of the gala arrived. The hall was even more beautiful than the last. Tall chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Red carpets covered the floors. People dressed in elegant gowns and suits filled the seats. TV cameras were set up around the hall. Claire arrived in a simple black dress, her hair softly curled, her face calm but serious. Backstage, she waited in silence. Other performers were laughing, chatting, warming up. Claire stayed alone, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat. Then, the announcer called her name. She took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. The audience clapped politely as she walked to the piano. But as she sat down, the room grew quiet. They knew who she was. The woman who once worked as a waitress, the woman whose music had shocked them all. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and began. The first notes were soft, gentle, like the beginning of a story. The melody moved slowly, like a river finding its way. It was filled with emotion, memories of love, loss, hope, and healing. Every note told a piece of her life. The pain of losing Daniel, the silence she had lived in, the long road back to music. The rediscovery of her soul. As she played, something magical happened. The audience leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, hearts open. Some closed their eyes, some wiped away tears. The music wrapped around them like a warm wind. Then, halfway through the piece, something new happened. The melody changed. It became stronger, braver. It was like Claire had found her voice and was now singing to the stars. The room filled with sound, powerful, moving, unforgettable. And just before the final note, she looked up. For a moment, she felt Daniel's presence beside her, not in pain, but in peace. She smiled, then played the last note. Silence, then an eruption of applause. The audience stood, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Noise was thunderous. Some people were crying. Others had their hands over their hearts. Claire stood slowly, bowed her head, and smiled. She felt no fear now, only peace. That night, after the gala, many people came to speak to her. Music directors, teachers, composers, students. They praised her, offered her work, asked to learn from her. But Claire was not thinking about fame or money. She was thinking about Miguel, about the children who needed music in their lives, about the young version of herself who once believed in magic. In the weeks that followed, Claire decided to begin teaching music part-time. She started a free weekend class at a community center for kids who couldn't afford lessons. Miguel was her first student. He showed up early every Saturday, notebook in hand. Full of questions, Claire also began visiting schools, orphanages, and hospitals to perform short concerts. She didn't care about big halls or fancy lights anymore. She wanted to bring music where it mattered most to hearts that needed it. She still worked at the restaurant sometimes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to stay close to the people who had believed in her when she was still invisible. The staff loved her, respected her, and called her their miracle pianist. The piano at the restaurant now had a sign beside it, played by Claire, the soul behind the silence. And every now and then on quiet evenings, she would sit down and play. Yes, the music would fill the room. The guests would stop talking. And once again, the restaurant would fall completely silent, because when Claire played, the world listened. Claire's journey had already become something people whispered about in awe. From being a quiet waitress who carried trays and smiled gently at tables, she had risen to become a musical inspiration across the country. But even as her story spread, she didn't act like a celebrity. Her world remained simple. She still lived in her small apartment, still took the bus to the restaurant, and still helped Miguel learn new songs on the keyboard every weekend. Fame had knocked at her door, but she had only opened it enough to let in the light, not the noise. Months passed. Her charity work with music became a powerful part of her life. Children who had never touched an instrument now clapped their hands with rhythm. Teenagers who were lost in stress found calm through her piano lessons. Teachers and parents told Claire that their students were changing, becoming softer, more focused, more confident, all because of music and because of Claire. One day, she received a letter from an international music school based in Vienna, Austria. They had seen videos of her gala performance and her charity classes. They wanted to invite her to give a speech and a performance at their annual music conference. It was the biggest event of the year for global music educators and artists. Claire was stunned. She read the letter 3 times, then quietly placed it on the table. She wasn't sure if she was ready to speak in front of such experienced musicians. These were people who had studied music for decades, traveled the world, played for royalty. What could she tell them? That evening, as she walked back from the restaurant, Miguel ran up behind her, waving a piece of paper excitedly. It was drawing a colorful sketch of Claire sitting at the piano with sparkles all around her. On top, Miguel had written in bold letters, "My hero." She laughed. "Miguel, I'm not a hero." He looked up at her. "You are to me, to everyone at the center." Her eyes grew wet with emotion. She bent down and hugged him. That one moment gave her the courage she needed. The next morning, she wrote back to the school in Vienna. She accepted the invitation. For the next few weeks, Claire prepared for her trip. She practiced a new composition, one she had written specially for the children she taught. A melody that blended hope, pain, and strength. She also wrote her speech carefully in simple, honest words. She didn't want to sound grand or clever. She just wanted to tell the truth. Finally, the day arrived. Claire flew to Vienna, stepping onto European soil for the first time in her life. The city was full of music-hall churches, street performers, grand concert halls. It felt like a dream. The night of the conference, Claire wore a simple navy blue dress. No jewelry, no glitter, just elegance and calm. As she stood backstage, her heart beat fast. She looked out through the curtains. The room was full of musicians, professors, journalists, even children from music schools around the world. When her name was called, she walked out slowly. The room was silent. She began to speak. "My name is Claire Bennett," she said. "I was once a waitress in a small restaurant. Most people walked past me. I used to think my music had no place in this world anymore. But one day a broken piano changed everything." She told them her story, not with fancy words, but with warmth. She talked about losing her fiancé Daniel and how his death had silenced her soul. She spoke of fear, of shame, and of that one moment when a teacher made her play in front of strangers, and how that moment brought her back to life. She spoke of children, like Miguel, who discovered their dreams through piano keys, of how music could open doors in the heart when nothing else could. Then she sat at the piano and began to play. The song was unlike anything they had heard. It was full of raw emotions, starting slow and soft, like a whisper of memory, then building into something strong and rising, like the voice of a child finding courage. It danced with joy, trembled with sadness, and ended with a peaceful harmony that seemed to say, "It's okay now. You're home." The room erupted into applause. Many stood up. Some were crying. Even the most serious professors were nodding. With deep respect, that night Claire received offers from schools across Europe, Asia, and America. They wanted her to teach, perform, lead music therapy programs, or write books. But Claire, once again, chose her own path. She returned home and began something even greater than before. With the help of donors and the support of the international school, she opened a music center in her city. It was called Daniel's. Song named after her late fiancés. Love had once inspired her dreams. The center became a place of magic. It had small classrooms filled with second-hand instruments, walls covered in children's artwork, and a grand piano in the main hall. Children from poor neighborhoods, children with disabilities, children who had never been heard, everyone was welcome. Claire worked there every day, teaching, smiling, and listening. She hired other musicians who had similar stories of struggle and healing. Center became a family. Miguel, now 13, became her assistant. He helped tune the instruments and even gave lessons to younger kids. He called Claire his piano mom, and she called him her little maestro. People came from far and wide to see what was happening at Daniel's song. News channels filmed documentaries. Musicians came to volunteer. Even the mayor visited and offered government support to expand the program. But through all this, Claire never let go of the simple truth that guided her. Music is not about fame or money or perfection. It's about feeling, about healing, about being seen. One winter evening, years later, Claire stood alone in the music hall of her center. It was quiet. Snow fell outside the window. She sat at the piano and played softly, just like she used to when no one was listening. As she played, she felt a presence beside her, gentle, warm. She closed her eyes and imagined Daniel smiling. She whispered, "We did it," and continued to play. That same night, a little girl from the neighborhood stood outside the center's glass door, holding her mother's hand. The lights inside were glowing golden. The sound of Claire's piano drifted out into the street. The girl tugged her mother's coat. "Mama," she said, "can I learn to play like that?" Her mother smiled. "Let's ask." And they stepped inside. Claire looked up, saw them, and smiled. She nodded to the girl. "Come closer," she said kindly. "Let me show you something beautiful." And with that, the circle continued. From pain to music, from silence to song, from a hidden heart to a shining light, Claire was no longer just a waitress. She was a healer, a teacher, a musician. But most of all, she was someone who dared to play when the world had forgotten her. And because of that, the world would never forget her again.